Today we're going to talk about progressing endurance training, and actually this sort of splashes over into progressing any kind of training. What's really important is there are several ways that we can increase the load or difficulty of a training session, but each of the ways that we progress these things have profoundly different outcomes. And if you're addressing your training and progressing the wrong facet of it, you're going to end up with results that you don't want. And so I just want to break down the four main ways that we increase the difficulty of an endurance session and what those outcomes are going to be. If we're doing an interval session or any training session, one of the things we can do is increase the difficulty of the climbing. And this is the number one way for young people to advance. It's the number one way for us to advance if we want to climb harder grades or to send longer routes. But it's really important to understand that you can't just keep adding harder and harder stuff. A really important part of this is when we're adding harder things into a session, we need to keep those rests really, really long. And so if I'm pursuing harder climbing and pursuing more climbing or less rest or whatever it might be, I'm going to really hit the wall quickly. And so as I go to harder and harder levels, my increase in rest has to match that as we see the increase, or else I just start to plateau. And so the number one way to move forward in any and all climbing is to do more hard climbing. The second way that we increase the difficulty of an interval or an endurance session is to increase the duration or distance of the intervals. Distance would just mean doing more moves. Duration is more time. It really depends on how you're tracking it. But if I increase the duration of a given work interval, that's going to increase my what we would call aerobic power, the ability to continue a power output at a given level. And that's really important for route climbing. It's less important for bouldering unless you're feeling yourself fatigued toward the end of a particular boulder problem. We can slowly increase the duration of intervals, but we also want to increase the duration of rest when we do that. For example, if I have a circuit that takes me 60 seconds to complete and then I rest 60 seconds in between, I may be able to recover just fine there. But if I increase the output to 90 seconds, I'm going to need longer recovery after that. If I just match it and go up to 90 seconds of recovery, I'm going to end up getting really tired very, very quickly. And so the longer my intervals go, the longer my rests have to be, and they have to keep growing. The rest actually has to grow faster than the interval does. In general, if you want to be aerobic and be able to do a lot of intervals, you would like your rest periods to be at least 1-to-1, preferably 1-to-2, and all the way up to like 1-to-4 before you feel like you're really getting too much rest. An example would be if I did a 30-second interval and then I rest for 2 minutes, and then a 30-second interval and I rest for 2 minutes. I might be able to do that for a very, very long time, and so it might not be a very effective workout. The third factor that we can adjust in interval training is the duration and type of rest period. For example, if I want to do easy climbing in between hard climbs, that's going to be different than if I just go and I sit on the floor. So if I'm taking passive recoveries, I'm going to be able to do a longer or harder bouldering session. If I'm doing active recoveries, I might be able to develop my capacity a little bit more, but the sessions are by necessity going to be a little bit shorter. When you're getting really fatigued toward the end of a session, a really important factor would be to think, man, maybe I can just add more recovery here rather than having to decrease the difficulty or the number of problems that I'm doing. It's really a big problem in indoor route climbing. If we go to the crag, my friends and I might climb for 10 minutes, then I'll take like a 30 or 40 minute break between climbs while they do things and whatever. At the gym, I might climb for 5 minutes. We don't have to do too much transition time. My partner climbs for a few minutes, and then I'm right back climbing with less rest than I would normally get. And so I can get super fatigued really quickly, And that's a really big problem because I might be under the illusion that I'm getting fit when I'm really just getting tired in that session. And I'm not going to see long-term fitness gains. And so it's really important that we manipulate and pay attention to the duration of the activity and the duration of the rest period. The final way that we advance intervals or advance endurance training is the number of repetitions that we're doing. And the number of repetitions that we do is directly linked to our capacity. If I can go into the gym and I can do 8 routes, the way that I'm going to increase my capacity and my long endurance would be to work up to 9 and then 10 and then maybe 12 routes. Really important here when we're adding more to the session is to make sure that we're resting plenty in between and that we rest more and more and more as we start to get fatigued. One of the things that's a problem with a lot of interval training is to be timing the climbing and timing the rests, even though physiologically we're not getting back to the same starting line. And so as a session goes on, one of the things we want to do is consider adding more rest in between. Adding more rest doesn't make you weak. It doesn't decrease your fitness gains. It doesn't make you lesser of a climber. It's really just a smart way for you to maintain more high quality movement per unit time. So to recap, there are 4 ways that we can advance our training. One is to increase the difficulty. That's how we increase our strength or power. Number 2 is to increase the duration or distance of the intervals, and that's usually how we increase muscular endurance or local anaerobic endurance. We can also manipulate the rest period. So the third thing that we can do is go to active rest. We can take longer rests, shorter rests, and usually the rest period manipulation is sort of the last thing you want to do. The final way that we can advance these intervals is to do more repetitions. Instead of trying to focus on doing longer circuits, we can just focus on doing more sets or more total circuits per session. It's a really great way to increase your capacity, and it's a really good way to get lots of quality climbing in per session. And so when you're advancing your intervals, you need to make sure that you're not trying to advance more than one thing at a time. It's really easy to get super fatigued by doing harder problems with shorter rests, but the training effect is negligible. We want to be careful and we want to be intentional with the outcomes that we go for in our training.